We're filming for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive in Danbury, Connecticut. I'm pleased to have Alan Raph with me today. I'm wondering, what do you put on your income tax form as your occupation?
Musician.
That covers a lot of things for you, doesn't it?
Yeah, I put musician slash, well, for my wife and I, musician, music teacher, but
Okay.
it goes both ways.
Yeah. What does your daughter think? You have a 10-year-old?
I have a 10-year-old, yes.
Does she have a sense of what you do?
Yeah,
during the
sort of. She has a sense of what I do now, which is somewhat different than what I did, let's say, 20 years ago.
Okay.
Because I have a long life before she came along, and
Right.
I have two kids that are actually older than me at this point, you know. I have a 43-year-old and I have a 36-year-old.
Okay.
A couple of grandkids in California.
Wow. So you have kind of a whole second
Yeah,
career
second
as a
family,
father.
second wife, second
Yeah.
life.
Uh-huh.
What does she think? She knows, of course, that I'm a musician. She knows that I conduct the Danbury Brass Band because she's been to many concerts. She knows that I teach around here. I teach right now at the moment at Emmanuel Lutheran School. I do a couple of hours a week there, teaching general music, which I asked for rather than trombone or instruments or that. And she knows that that I sit with her every morning for an hour, and she practices piano, which we did this morning included. She's been playing for 5 years, and she's got a remarkably good ear and a good musical sense, and her struggles are more with reading notes, where that's where we have to kind of pound things into her. But she's getting there.
Yeah. Does she like to improvise a little bit?
Very little. She's not sure what it is.
Right.
But just recently, she's singing in a choir on Sundays, and they're going to give a concert. And the choir director brought out a particular piece of music that has a flute solo at the beginning. And he said, well, if anybody here plays flute or recorder or tin whistle or anything, audition for it, and we'll have you play the solo. So she asked me to borrow a flute, which I did from one of the guys in the brass band. And she practiced it, and she'd been playing for a week and a half, and she played the solo, and the guy said, okay. So she came home, she said, I got the gig.
All right. She's getting the terms down.
She's getting the terms
Yeah.
down. She's got a good sense of humor.
Right.
And her mother, of course, is a musician. My wife is a string player. So between strings and brass, of course, naturally, she's going to gravitate to woodwinds,
Right.
for new expenses.
Sure. So you have to pay somebody else to give the lessons.
Right, exactly.
Well, you're a trombone player.
Trombone
by
player
nature.
primarily, bass trombone specifically,
Yeah.
although I play related instruments, tenor and baritone horn and tuba, and I've done a lot of work on the other instruments too. But basically, I guess my reputation is bass trombone. I've been doing that for some years.
And you grew up in New York City?
I grew up in Brooklyn.
A musical family?
Musical family. My father was a musician. He ended up he ended up out of work, but in his heyday, he conducted the Stop the Music television show, and he conducted Name That Tune, the original shows back in the 50s. And he played, in his day, when he was in his 20s, he played trombone with Dixieland groups, including Phil Napoleon and some of those in New York City. So when it came time for me to take music, I took piano at age 8. And when I went into high school at age 14, I went to Brooklyn Tech, of all places. And in order to avoid the lunchroom lines, which were enormous, I went down to the basement. There was a sign you could take music lessons, and I ended up signing up for the trombone. So I started trombone in high school and went to New York University, took music education, which in those days I felt, or we all felt, those interested in my career were thinking that this would be a good thing to fall back on in case things didn't work out musically.
This was the late
mid-50s, actually.
50s, yeah.
Beginning. Well, I went to NYU from 51 to 55. And things did work out, so I managed to do fairly decently professionally. 10 years later, in 65, I decided to go back for a master's, so I went to Teachers College, Columbia, and I got the master's in music education.
Was your were your parents supportive of you going into music?
It was almost a gimme. It was just something to do. My father was in music. My mother didn't, much. She liked music and all. It was just a way to go. took piano, and when I was taking piano lessons at age 8, 9, and 10, I had visions of being a concert pianist, and music has always been kind of the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And my father did impress one thing on me, which was really good, and that is to do it all, to do as many different kinds of music as I could. So I made that a campaign. When I played trombone, and my first jobs on trombone, I was lucky. I got a Broadway show almost right off the bat when I was 20 years old. After that, I started paying dues, because when the show closed, I had nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I went out with Sammy Kaye on the road.
Yeah.
I played with American Opera Society in New York City. I played a lot of subbing at the Radio City Music Hall. And doing shows and doing this kind of thing, plus playing the symphony against the popular or dance music end of it, kind of pointed me in the direction of being able to at least make contacts in the various fields of music. So on my dossier, I write charter member of the American Symphony Orchestra with Leopold Stokowski,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time, I was a charter member of Gerry Mulligan's concert jazz band. And in those days, while it wasn't, it was rare. It wasn't not heard of, but it was fairly rare to do both ends of the spectrum. I got a lot of raised eyebrows from various people along the way. Until I finally realized that when I'm talking with jazz people, I don't talk classical, and when I'm talking with symphony people, I don't mention that I just did Birdland the night before.
They don't feel that it's really appropriate to be doing that?
At that time, it was what would I say? It was, I won't say threatening. That's not a good word, because I was too young in the stage of my career to be threatening to anybody. But when you're talking backstage with a group of classical musicians, symphony musicians, the talk is about the symphony world and about the connections and the contractors and the opportunities and all of that. And then to pull in, well, I played Birdland last night, or, I've been doing this, that, and the other, it's almost like stopping the conversation. Well, okay, that's nice, and what were we talking about now,
Right. Why would you do that,
Yeah.
I guess?
Yeah.
Is it harder to raise in the ranks of the classical world or in the jazz world?
The first thing I noticed, I did the classical world first. I was doing shows, and I was doing symphony orchestras. I played with the Symphony of the Air and various, like I said, the American Opera Society and various groups. Before I really got into the commercial end of it, which came about through my having a spare weekend, and I went out with Larry Elgard and did about a half year with him, and it segued into Gerry Mulligan with the concert jazz band. I found on the way up that jazz musicians had ears they could hear way beyond the instrument, and I found out at the same time, of course people are going to raise eyebrows at this, that classical musicians, although some of them have wonderful ears, by and large, they're pretty much into their instrument. A clarinet player hears the world in relation to the clarinet. And this is a generalization, but this is what I found at that time. And we are talking mid and late 50s and early 60s. The classical musicians, by and large, saw the world as revolving around their particular instrument. The jazz musicians saw a more total picture. But now again, classical musicians could tell you about Bartók and Beethoven, and the jazz musicians in those days couldn't.
Okay.
So whether you wanted to hear about Beethoven and Bartók, that's another story.
Is it partly because classical musicians, I don't know if I'll express this correctly, but their main role is to reproduce as closely as possible what's on the page? Does that make their vision kind of more narrow?
It might, because you're reading and interpreting the written note, and you're pleasing a conductor, and the conductor in turn, of course, is pleasing the people that he has to please. But you are relegated to the written note. There's no latitude. There's no emotional freedom in that sense, like as there is in jazz. So that, yes, I would say that's
Yeah.
a good factor.
In the classical world, or even in the jazz world, is there a certain amount of professional jealousy or kind of jockeying for position?
Yeah, but that's in life.
Yeah. I
In
guess
life,
that's
there's jockeying for position. Everything you do, there's jockeying
Yeah.
for position. Corporate, down to freelance, down to whatever you get into. There's always this.
It's true.
And unfortunately, people come into New York or come into the business with the idea that their instrument and their ability and their talent is going to carry them, and it should make them a star. And they get very, very perturbed when they find out that the business suddenly looms its ugly face. And they have to cope with the business. They have to cope with, as they say on your report card in public school, working and playing well with others. You know, they have to cope with this. And a lot of them are really, and this is jazz and symphonic and whatever, commercial musicians, a lot of them are really not aware of being a person as well as being a musician. And those that learn do better than those that don't learn. Many people come into town with we'll call it an attitude, and they go out of town with the same attitude, but they go out of town.
Yeah. So a contractor, if he's looking at his list of people to call, he will also be considering their personalities.
Oh, you better believe it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You can get, given the bass trombone, you can get 5 guys to play the bass trombone part, and 2 of them will argue with you, so they're not going to get called. You know, the 3rd guy might not show up on time. He's not going to get called.
Yeah.
Leaving 2, and out of the 2, well, so-and-so is a nicer guy than so-and-so, you know?
Yeah.
All playing being equal. All 5 of them can play the same, let's say. But you're going to go with somebody that just kind of rubs you the right way. Absolutely.
I guess Milt Hinton was the classic example of, you know.
Milt was, Mr. Perfect.
Yeah, right.
Milt was absolutely wonderful. There's nobody that doesn't love Milt Hinton, just like Joe Wilder. There's nobody that doesn't love Joe.
Yeah.
There are certain people that are around here that are just absolutely brilliant musicians and the nicest people in the world.
Right. They make you feel good to be with
Milt
them,
was a
right?
sweetheart.
Yeah.
Clark Terry's another. There's so many.
Right.
Yeah.
When you think back early in your career, was there certain milestones that that you reflect on now that were important, as like Gerry Mulligan, or? Very,
very much so. I came into the business with the ability to play the trombone. I played a Broadway show. I did the music hall. I did the operas and classical music. I did do Larry Elgart on bass trombone, by the way. So I was playing first trombone on the classical end of it, and I was playing bass trombone on the jazz end. Let's say, not really jazz at that point, but on the dance band end of it. When a tremendous milestone, was Gerry Mulligan. I remember walking. I was at the Union, and Dick Hickson, who was a bass trombone player, a very busy one in those days, happened to be on the same path as me. And we said hello, and he looked, he said, "Oh, yeah, you play bass trombone too, don't you?" He says, "Gerry Mulligan's putting a band together, So I said, "Well, do you happen to have his number?" He says, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do." So he gave me his number, and I said, "Would you mind very much if I use your name as a reference?" "Yeah, you can use my name, So I called up Gerry that night from Staten Island, where I was living, and told him who I was. He said, "Well, where have you played?" I said, "Oh, well, played with Larry Elgar." He says, "This is a jazz band." I said, "Well, I'm quick." He says, "Come on, down." That was it. That was the end of the conversation. I went down to the rehearsal. I sat next to Brookmeyer. Now, Gerry letting me into his band was a big moment for me, because I stayed with the band for 3 years. I rejoined the band 18 years later and stayed for another year or so. And musically, it was a wonderful experience. Brookmeyer was the person in my life that I learned the most from, sitting next to Bob. I always prided myself on my reading ability. I was a good reader. I could read music and at sight and balance and blend and listen beyond the horn and all of that. And I sat down next to Brookmeyer, and it was like I couldn't read at all. He would not only read a new arrangement, let's say a George Russell complex arrangement, but he would read it the first time down in the style that the band was going to play after they played it 25 times or so.
Wow.
But Bob would do it right at the opening. He would do it with the right inflections, with the right style, with the right nuances. And I can't say I never heard him make a mistake, but I can't recall him making a mistake.
Yeah.
And sitting next to him, from the first rehearsal on, I had the ability to play outside of my instrument. So I was playing his instrument. Whatever he did, I phrased the same way. And he was playing first trombone. It was interesting because it was valve trombone on first, slide trombone on second, and bass trombone on third. Wayne Andre was the slide trombone. Whatever Brookmeyer did, I would do it as quick as I could, so that it would almost seem as though I were doing it too. I would just listen intently. I was playing through his horn.
Is that what you mean? Sorry to interrupt. Is that what you mean by playing outside your instrument?
Yeah.
Okay.
Playing your instrument means you're involved with the instrument, the intonation, trying to fit in, trying to get the right sound, and loud and soft and fast and slow and all of that. Playing outside of your instrument means looking at almost like looking at yourself from beyond yourself and seeing how you fit in. Realizing when you have the melody, when you don't have the melody, when you have a leading line, when you should not be heard, and when it's completely unimportant whether you play or not. I always choose not to play in those cases. But there are many, many times where it just doesn't matter. You hear yourself being doubled over here and over there. And I'm not talking about Mulligan's band now. I'm just talking about average commercial.
Right.
And there are many times when if you drop a note or two, it absolutely doesn't matter a bit. Nobody's going to even care, much less say anything. So you are hearing beyond what you're doing. There are people, though, that live, eat, and breathe the trombone, and everything they do is through the trombone. And there's some good musicians that do it that way, too. Brookmeyer goes beyond that.
Yeah. He's
a superb player. And what was interesting, and what I learned, one of the things I learned from him, in jazz playing, you never knew where he was going to come in from. You would hear other players, and even Gerry, you'd have an idea of what he's going to do in a certain tune at a certain tempo. Brookmeyer, you had an idea of the overall, but you never knew how he was going to attack it, and he always surprised you. He always surprised you. And it was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
I remember listening to Body and Soul night after night after night after night, and I would try and outguess him, and I never did, not even once. And Wayne and I would look at each other like, oh my God, isn't this wonderful?
Yeah. Boy, wish you could grab a little of that, that kind of creativity. That was, what years?
That was 61, 62.
What was the work scene like for that band and that style of music?
How much did the band work? The band probably didn't work as much as the bands during the 40s worked. They were out all night, Benny Goodman's band and, some of the earlier bands were working a lot. Mulligan would do weekends at a club in Jersey, perhaps, or he'd do something upstate New York. He'd do some run-outs from New York. We did a couple of tours. We toured this country, and it was mainly one-nighters. We went to Europe. We were busy in Europe. But sporadic would have to be the word, because there were times when the band didn't work very much. We would do Newport, and we'd do a couple of the festivals, and then lay off for the rest of the summer. Yeah.
What kind of money were you making with that group?
I asked for a little more money, and he paid it, and then he resented it. So we had a little tete-a-tete about it. At one point, I was playing with Mulligan for, I guess a year, and he was going to go to Europe. So Nick Travis was calling the guys. he was acting as personnel manager. Nick was first trumpet player with the band. And I was offered a Broadway show. I was offered Music Man. It was running already, but the first trombone player was leaving, and the conductor wanted me to come in and play. So I had that as a springboard. That would have given me $350 a week. So I felt that instead of asking the $250, which I knew everybody more or less was getting on Gerry's band, I asked for $300, and I got it. I wasn't the highest paid guy by any means, but I was making a little more than 2 or 3 of the other guys in the band. So $300. I went to Europe for $300 a week, which was decent in those days.
Yeah. Did you have to pay your own way? I mean, like, your own meals and all
Meals,
that kind of
yes, and oh my, I don't remember if we paid the rooms or not.
stuff? Mm-hmm.
I don't remember. I remember signing in,
Uh-huh.
but I don't remember
Right.
if we. I have a feeling that we may have paid for the rooms, or we may have gotten an allowance. I just don't remember that.
Now, most guys say that the audiences in Europe were different. Did you find that to be true?
Now we're talking 40 years ago.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I don't know how they are now, but in those days they were all over you. The audiences were very demonstrative and very appreciative of what you did.
Mm-hmm.
Very responsive, warmer perhaps than some other audiences. But when we went to Amsterdam, for instance, we played where the Concertgebouw Orchestra plays. It's a round stage. I think it's completely surrounded by audience, if I remember. Well, the photographers were on stage during the concert shooting flashbulbs in our eyes.
Ah.
And I remember Brookmeyer almost beating them away with his trombone. You know,
Yeah.
that was different.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen that before. We had one very interesting experience at the Sports Palace in Berlin. This was 1961, I believe. Of course, the war was over in 45. The Berlin Wall was still up.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a personal experience. I took the train from West Berlin to East Berlin. I got off way out in East Berlin. I wanted to make sure I was there because I couldn't tell by the map if I was passing the Brandenburg Gate or not. But I got off in East Berlin. And I had a heck of a time getting back because I didn't have any East German money. So I had to go to a store that couldn't sell me a camera because I didn't have the passport or I didn't have the right papers. And a guy from the store walked me a couple of blocks to some money changer where they changed my couple of dollars worth of West money to East money, and I was able to get back. But it was scary for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
At the Sports Palace, which I started to say, we played a concert. And I guess the concert normal length was about 2 hours. So we were finishing it up. We had 1 or 2 encores that we were going to play. But after we did the last number, instead of applauding, half the audience got up and left. They just left. And we couldn't understand this. We found out later that these people were from East Berlin. They had a curfew, and they already stayed past their curfew. So if they all left together, they had a chance of getting back to East Berlin without facing the authorities.
I see.
So they all got up en masse and left. It was the weirdest thing. We thought they enjoyed the concert, and here they are running out, you know. But it was
But they
strange.
gave you a pretty high compliment.
Oh, yeah.
By staying
No,
that
they
late.
yeah, they did.
Yeah.
They did. They actually stayed past their curfew because they were so interested in the music.
You found your way into the studio scene in New York?
Yeah, I always had that in the back of my mind that I wanted to do studio work.
Mm-hmm.
And Mulligan, well, the Elgart Band was a good entree into that, and Mulligan was a very good entree into that. I started doing, through another connection, I started doing a lot of the rock and roll dates. I got fairly busy doing those things. I was doing a Broadway show, and I was playing Mulligan at Birdland. I was also doing dates during the day. And I started doing some jazz dates. We did a Cy Coleman date because of our bass player at the time, Bill Takis, was Cy's bass player, and he contracted. So we did some sort of Finnegan things. We did Manny Album. We did a number of the jazz writers. It was kind of a get me the Mulligan band. You know, these guys are good. Let's get as many of them as we can on this date, and you know, we know we have some good guys. I was at that point. I was juggling, and juggling is the name of that's the story of my life. Was juggling, keeping Mulligan happy when I had to send a sub to the first set at Birdland every night because I was playing a Broadway show. I was doing A Funny Thing Happened on the way to the Forum, which let out at 11, and Mulligan started at Birdland at 9 or 9:30. So Benny Powell used to sub for me. And I came in and did the second and did the night. I'd finish at 4 o'clock and go home and get up early and do a couple of dates and do the show and do that again, you know. It was kind of interesting. But juggling, keeping one contact while you make another, and then honoring the commitments. If you overbook, and you do this all the time. You book something that's right on the tail of something else, and then you have the problem of trying to get out of the first thing a little bit early or come to the second thing a little bit late, and there's generally a way. I mean, I only once or twice had to resort to outright subterfuge. Most of the time I could lie my way.
Oh, I got stuck in traffic.
I remember once breaking the, my daughter at the time, with my 43-year-old, had a little plastic cow, and I broke its foot off and put iodine on it in the middle of a rehearsal. I reached in and said, "Oh man, I just broke my tooth," you know. I managed to get out of rehearsal. I left the trombone on the chair, you know, just to make it look really good. And I went out, took my other trombone, and went and did a brass quintet date uptown, you know. Every now and then I'd have to do something like that, but not too often.
Right.
But I have told a few lies in my day.
You have to be a little creative.
Yeah.
I didn't know Benny Powell played bass trombone.
Benny studied with me. Lou
Really?
Van Haney was the second trombone player with the New York Philharmonic, and Benny and two other guys from the Basie band studied with Lou. And Van Haney moved out to Indiana to take a job teaching there, and I inherited Benny Powell as a student. Benny stayed with me for a couple of years, and we got to be really good friends. We don't see each other a lot now, but we're good friends. We know each other and we enjoy each other.
Right.
And Benny, in those days, was studying bass trombone with me, yes. He could play the low notes, and he did all the exercises, and he got himself into a good player.
Good.
And I like Benny a lot.
Yeah. A real gentleman.
Yeah.
You mentioned doing rock and roll dates.
Yeah, many.
Can you think of, did you even know the name of the bands that you were playing for sometimes?
No.
So you just came in?
No.
Like a horn section?
No.
And they'd put the music in front of you, and you'd put the headphones on?
Yeah.
And
I had no idea. I've done,
really?
I did stuff for Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I did stuff for Bob Dylan.
Really?
Who's the guy with the raindrops? Not Burt Bacharach, the other guy.
Raindrops keep falling on my
Not
head.
that one, the other raindrops.
It must be Raindrops,
Oh
that
my.
guy.
I can't think of his name. Anyhow.
Okay.
Whatever. I'll think of his name later, after I leave here.
Yeah.
But a lot of the various people.
Uh-huh.
I did a lot of work for them, and I never knew who it was going to be. And occasionally somebody would tell me, you remember the date we did for so-and-so? Well, they're playing it a lot. And I'd say, oh, did I do that? You know, was I on that? And it just never really, I would keep an account of the jazz dates that I did, or the symphonic dates, because they, to me, were a little more meaningful. But some of these others would just kind of sit down and play a few figures, and it didn't really matter who you were playing for or what you were playing for. You just did your job and did it as well as you could. And
Most likely you get one or two passes at those things, and they'd be done, right?
Yeah, for the most part.
Who would be who would be sitting next to you on dates like that?
Well, you're going to interview Eddie Burt later on today.
Yeah.
And Eddie and I have done a lot of work together. And we had a very funny situation. I remember this better than Eddie, which is unusual because Eddie's got a memory like a steel trap, and he's accurate. But this I remember well. We were at Stay Phillips, and we were recording Frankie Valli with the Four Seasons. And it wasn't even Frankie Valli in those days. It was just simply the Four Seasons. And we were sitting as a band. They had an isolation booth for the singer, and they had a control booth for the producer and all. And we were doing a Christmas album. And it came to the tune "Oh Holy Night," which starts on the third beat. So it goes da 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 da. Oh Holy Night, you know, it comes in like that. Well, Eddie and I were the only two trombones. We were sitting side by side, looking straight into the booth, and Frankie Valli was doing a solo on this, and he could not get this. It went oh, no, Frank. They're telling him from the booth, you know, you have to start a little bit later. Okay. Oh, no, Frank, you have to start earlier. And by this time, he's getting into a panic. You know, the eyes are starting to get wide. And it went on, it must have gone on for, it seemed like a long time. It was probably about 10 minutes or so. And on recording time, where time is money, you know, 10 minutes of wasting time like that, you start getting nervous. And they were getting very nervous in the booth. Eddie is very cool. He was just sort of sitting there, you know, and I was digging the whole thing, you know. So finally, he just wasn't getting it. So the producer said, wait, I have an idea. He sent 2 guys into the booth with Frankie. And we did the take with them holding his mouth like this, both sides of him. And Frank was there with the eyes popping, you know. It was diddle-da-diddle-da-diddle-da-diddle-da-diddle-da. Oh, holy. They released his mouth. He sang the tune. We did a take. I'll never forget that. I have the record at home. The record starts with angels from the realms of glory. You know, it's that kind of a thing. Oh, God. It's a party record. And then, of course, when I tell the story about Frankie Valli doing Oh Holy Night, you can just see it, you know?
That's really funny.
Eddie was there. Ask him.
That's so funny because I know what you're talking about, that song. Like, even a trained musician, you have to,
It's
okay, you got to think about this.
You have to remember because it feels like it's on one.
Right.
Yeah.
Poor Frankie. I'm surprised that if you guys were there, that must have been like a whole live date.
It was all live.
Yeah.
In those days, the only isolation was putting the singer into a separate booth.
Okay.
It was all done live. Later on, in the 70s and 80s, then it was all overdubbed. Nothing was live.
Mm-hmm.
You would go in and everything had been done already, and all they wanted to do was put on brass. So it didn't matter. You put on the headphones and they play it to you, and you do it.
Right.
But in those days, in the 60s and even the 70s, it was live.
Did you ever have to deal with, bad arrangers, bad copyists?
Constantly.
Those things
Constantly.
Yeah.
You had to make them sound good.
Mm-hmm.
There was one expression that Charlie Colello, who was one of the successful arrangers, used to use, and that was make it work, you know? I said, well, Charlie, this is impractical for, so make it work, you know? Mm-hmm. So you made it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might find something different to play that's not on the paper.
There were even times, and many times, when we went into a date, and there might have been some sketched music, but certainly not an arrangement. Or there might have been no music, and they just said, look, we're doing this, and they play a little bit of the rhythm for us live, and we were to make up some horn fills. And I remember doing a Pepsi-Cola commercial that way, where the band was a successful rock and roll band that Pepsi decided they should do the next commercial because they were hot. And these guys had 3 or 4 solid days of studio time. I came in, my segment took about 8 hours. And we just sat there making up things and discarding things and keeping a note here and a chord there. And it was the most boring way to do it, but the money was good.
Yeah.
So you didn't mind.
I guess Pepsi had the money to
to
spend on the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, man. That's interesting.
But you want to make it work.
Yeah.
You want it to sound good. And Mel Davis, who's a wonderful trumpet player, you talk about milestones in my career. Gerry Mulligan was one, doing that band. Playing with Brookmeyer was a milestone. When I started doing really good studio work, and I was doing dates with Bernie Glow and Mel Davis, who were the top 2 trumpet players in New York City for many years, I felt, well, I've arrived.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing things with these guys, and I'm able to kind of hold my own with them, Mel told me something one day that spun me completely around, and I'm so happy he did. After a certain point, when I realized I could play the trombone, and there was nothing out there that was going to scare me too much, music-wise, I started developing an attitude of, well, this is all beneath me, And we were doing a date, Mel and Bernie and I, we were doing a thing for RCA Camden. I think it was a rip-off of the Herb Alpert style. It was called Living Brass. And it was the Herb Alpert tunes done with studio brass, so that people could buy the record for $2 instead of $4, and they'd get the same music. In fact, they'd probably get it played better. And there was something that we were playing that was just terrible. And I remember looking at Mel saying, rah, 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 and I started doing a real, isn't this ridiculous? I mean, look at this garbage, Mel, during the break, he walks over and he puts his arm around my shoulders. He says, Alan, he says, we're here to sell it, not to buy it. And wow, did that ever change? That changed me right there on the spot. I thought, my God, yes. We're here to sell it, not to buy it. Here I'm sitting there like I'm buying it. And that just turned me completely around. You know,
Yeah.
when you learn something, you learn it immediately, like a
Uh-huh.
ton of bricks, and that was a ton of bricks at that time.
Wow. Very succinct, you
Yeah.
put it. Wow.
Yeah.
I have to remember that one.
It was good.
Next
Well,
time.
I've told that to many people
Yeah.
since, but
Yeah.
but Mel laid it on me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad he did.
Did you, were you called upon to do much improvising and soloing? And,
Not a lot.
Yeah.
Not a lot. There are 2 or 3 records that are floating around that I have a little bit of improvisation
Mm-hmm.
on. I did, playing with Mulligan's band at Birdland, we played opposite Dizzy Gillespie, we played opposite Art Blakey, we played opposite many very good jazz bands. As a matter of fact, it's funny, I went to school with Wayne Shorter. We both went to NYU. He was a half a year behind me. And I'm playing here with Gerry Mulligan, and Wayne is playing with Art Blakey. In fact, I got Wayne to write an arrangement for Mulligan's big band, which he did, and Gerry played a thing called Mama G. It was one of the tunes that Gerry played with the band. But along with Wayne was Freddie Hubbard and also Curtis Fuller. And Curtis I loved. I just did an album of his called Cabin in the Sky right around that time when we did this particular Birdland job. And I had Brookmeyer and Willie Dennis there in the Mulligan band, and Curtis walking around listening to the band, and I had the nerve to stand up and play a blues solo on one of the tunes that Gerry had, because Gerry finally, sometimes he wouldn't show up until the first couple of tunes, and the band would just play something, and we'd share the solos. So I would stand up occasionally and play, and I remember at one point I stood up and played this blues thing. And you know, I thought, oh my God, this is horrible, but I have to get through the 24 bars or the whatever it is. And after it was over, after the set was over, Curtis came over. He says, "Hey man, it's very nice." And I thought, oh my God.
Heaven, heaven.
No, you didn't have to say that. Me? So I can play. But compare, it's like you wear a sailor's hat, and to your mother and father you're a sailor, but to a sailor you're not a sailor. You know what I mean? I can play jazz. To a jazz player, I'm not a jazz player.
Okay. What was the racial scene like in the studio work? And did it change?
Rock and roll was half black, half white for openers.
Yeah.
I remember doing many dates where I might have been the only white musician, and doing dates where there were a few blacks. It's hard to. There was never really a line of distinction. I mean, it just flowed. You went one way or the other, and it didn't matter.
That's
your
good.
friends were of all colors, and it was just part of the way the world is.
Yeah. That's good. I'm going to play a little blindfold test with you.
Uh-oh. Oh, my.
But this is not the typical thing. This is a date that you're on.
Okay.
Okay, but I'm
All
just
right.
curious
All right.
if you'll be able to
I probably
remember.
won't.
Because I know you fellas do an awful lot of things, and we'll see if this rings a bell.
Is that Sebesky, Malaguena?
Well, okay, very good.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, yeah. From his Giant Box?
Pardon?
Was it from Giant Box or from a different album?
Album was called. Actually, I didn't write down the name
it was
of it.
actually
Just
Don's
Malaguena.
own band. It was Don's all-star band, Cycles. I think it was.
Yeah, I think it was called.
Oh, okay. Jimmy Pugh and I with the 2 trombones, and we played mostly baritone horn in that band. Don, it's an interesting story about Don. Back in the 60s, I used to do a lot of recording at, what's his name? Rudy Van Gelder. Rudy Van Gelder's. And Creed Taylor used to record from there a lot. Creed had Verve Records at that time. And every now and then he'd pull some new talent. Not new, but unknown, relatively unknown. And he pulled in Bob James and Don Sebesky at around the same time. Gave them both an album. Don did Giant Box, and Bob did a thing called Opus 1, I believe. And Bob took off, Don didn't. At least the way I saw it. And this is the worm's eye view, because I'm not seeing it from on top. I'm just seeing it from how it happened to hit me. Mm-hmm. Bob became an international star.
Yeah.
And Don was well known, did wonderful arrangements, was busy, but he wasn't an international star. Now, years down the road, he started this band, and this started in the 80s, around 85. And the first band, which I think this record is, had Faddis and Soloff playing trumpets, and Jimmy and I were playing trombone. Eddie Daniels was in the band, Alex Foster, Jimmy Madison? Yeah, Jimmy Madison played drums, and Jay Lenhart played bass. It was a really good band. They call it New York All-Star Band. And it made a little bit of noise. We played some of the clubs, and it kind of established Don now as a band leader of some repute. Mm-hmm. You know, prior to that, he was an arranger. Now he's a band leader. And he wore it well. He still does. Mm-hmm. We've done a few albums since. I think I've done all of his albums with him. The most recent is the Joyful Noise album, which is a superb Duke Ellington. I don't know if you've heard it or not, but oh God, it's good. And it's one of the few albums that you're nervous for the whole date because it's hard to play.
Wow.
It's hard stuff to play. When you do a take and he says, "Okay, that's it," you think, "Oh, thank God," you know.
Isn't that curious? Because you said that you had gotten to a point where not too much scared you,
well,
it made you nervous.
I know. Most of the time I was bored to death, but occasionally I was scared to death, you know? And it goes from one extreme to the other. There's no middle ground. Most of the time you just kind of do it, you know? But then every now and then something comes up and you think, oh, I'm over my head. I will not make this, you know?
Is it mostly rhythmic stuff? Or is it hard to pin it down?
Rhythmic, tempo, accuracy were the considerations. Make sure that the tempo fits. Make sure that everything is gelling feel-wise, where the tempo comes into it and hitting right at the right moment. You know, and then rhythms become a whole big thing because you don't have a lot of time to learn the arrangement. If you're playing with a band that plays it every night, after a week or so, you know it. Mm-hmm. But having it on a recording, seen for the first time, the second and third time, you're really intent on making sure that you're reading exactly what's written. Because it's easy to confuse a figure with something else. It's easy to poke in a note. And those are some of the considerations. Technically, there were some technical things, too.
Yeah. How about classical experiences? Are there any particular pieces, Stravinsky or anything like that, you've ever had really challenging work in the symphonic world? Yeah,
I recorded Forest of the Amazon with Villa-Lobos, and that had some moments. Mm-hmm. There are a number of symphonic things. Yeah, there were moments, a lot of moments.
I got to watch the Nashville Symphony rehearse The Rite of Spring once, and I was watching the score, and I just couldn't understand how can you play this?
You know, I did it last year with a local symphony, the Ridgefield Symphony. I played bass trumpet, and it was the first time I ever played bass trumpet on The Rites of Spring. And the bass trumpet does not play much, but when it plays, it's out there. You hear it. And it took some counting, and it took a little bit of paying attention, and it came off. But I didn't just toss it off as, well, here's something else to do. You know, it was I was in the edge of my chair more than the back of the chair.
I want to mention a couple people here that you've worked with, and Quincy Jones.
I love Quincy.
Yeah,
I love Quincy. He kissed me. Did I tell you that?
Really?
Yeah.
Never wash that cheek again?
Yeah, right. We did, he did The Wiz, the movie The Wiz, which was huge sessions of many, many musicians. In fact, on one session, I played tuba along with Dave Bargeron, Don Butterfield, and Tony Price. There were 4 tubas on this one particular session. On another session, I played bass trombone, and there were about 6 or 8 trombones on the thing. And after the sessions were over, I got a call from the contractor. Could I come down to A&R and overdub something? So I came down. Tony Price was there. I came down on bass trombone. Tony was playing tuba. Both of us had to reinforce a bass line of one of the arrangements. It was about a 3-page, 3 trombone page arrangement. Sort of an up-tempo, and it's fairly busy. And we sat down and we played it, and they took a balance and they recorded it. We played it twice. The second time was the take, and that was it. So we walked in to listen to it, and Quincy's listening to it, and he gets up and kisses me on the cheek, which meant, see you later.
Good work.
Yeah. I love Quincy. He deserves more than the success he's got. I mean, he's the most successful person in the world, and he deserves that plus.
I see you've worked on Sesame Street.
Yeah. I never did it as a steady job, but they have a character there called Telly Monster, and he plays they call it a tuba. It turns out to be like an E-flat alto horn that's all smashed up, and he sort of holds it while a tuba player plays the tuba, and I was the tuba player on many occasions.
Really?
So a lot of the episodes where Telly Monster has some sort of carryings on about playing tuba or dropping it or losing it or whatever, the tuba that you hear is me. Joe Raposo and I were friends for years. We both studied with Nadia Boulanger back in 1956. That's where I met Joe. In fact, at that time, we would take our private lesson with her. We would take the class lesson with her. We'd sit in the studio and play. And then at night, there was a French and an English army base, 2 different bases, in Fontainebleau, France. And I put together a little combo, and we used to go play these places, and we'd make like $6 a night or so. But it was something to do at night. Joe was the piano player.
Oh, Joe Raposo.
Joe Raposo, yeah.
Neat. I think Quincy took from her also.
I think he might have, yeah. I know he was with Dizzy Gillespie's World Statesman Band, and they went down to South America, and the first place he went was over to Villalobos. He hung out with him. Quincy was always searching, always looking. Yeah. There ain't much wrong with Quincy.
You decided to get another degree.
I decided to get the master's 10 years after getting the bachelor, just simply because I was doing shows at that time, and I had the time. I was doing I think I was doing a Broadway show that looked like it was going to last for a while. I forget which one it was, but it was on the books for about a year or so. So I went to Teachers College and horse traded my way into a degree.
And is it paid off as far as?
It's paid off insofar as it gives me a little credibility as far as knowing what I talk about educationally and instrument-wise and all of that. I have a number of publications on the market, mostly through Carl Fisher, and in writing my bio in the books, I'm able to naturally state that I have this degree and that degree, which means a lot with a lot of teachers.
Right.
I also developed the vocabulary in taking education degrees to reach students a little bit better than I might have otherwise. It was just, that was the field that I thought I should get a little extended education. And I started for a doctorate, and at that point I looked in the mirror and I thought, come on, doctorate, yeah, right. I'm not going to do that. So I took 2 courses and that was it. By that time I met Mary Ann, and we had, started going together and ultimately got married. I met her at Teachers College. I was teaching there, actually. I had a class where I had to teach all the instruments, and she was the only student. They let her take the class. So naturally, one thing led to another, and we've been married now 23 years.
Cool. My goodness. Wynton Marsalis, you've played behind?
Yes, once.
One time?
It was wonderful. I was so nervous.
Yeah.
I got a call from Art Barron that he recommended me for a Wynton Marsalis Lincoln Center concert because they were doing the music of Gerry Mulligan.
Oh.
And I was to play tuba and bass trombone. So I went, and I went into Carroll Studios with the tuba and the bass bone, and I just sat there very quietly and went and came in, and there was sort of a lull, so I went up to him and I said, excuse me, I said, my name's Alan Raph. The next thing I know, he's hugging me, It was the warmest thing. I thought, oh my God. So, immediately I fell in love with Wynton.
Uh-huh.
Then I saw the way he rehearsed the band and the way he worked, and it was on the money. It was just so good. I enjoyed a lot working with him, and I enjoyed almost as much, in a different way, meeting Wycliffe Gordon. Wycliffe, you look at him and you just don't think he's going to get that trombone in his face fast enough to play, because he doesn't set. He picks up the horn and he's playing like this, and then he's off in space somewhere, and the next thing you know, he's playing again. You don't see this kind of setting up that guys do.
Uh-huh.
And he plays astoundingly well.
Yeah.
And he's incredibly good. So I listened to that. I listened to him play the sousaphone, and we got talking a little bit. And at one point, I brought in that book that I gave you, Le Trombone. It's a kind of a funny book that I did that's out on the market. I gave him a copy of that, and he brought me a CD that he did with somebody else. And we got talking. He said to me, he says, hey, I got to take a couple of tuba lessons with you. I said, yeah. I'll teach you everything I know in 5 minutes.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he's a wonderful tuba player, and just an outstanding trombone player. I enjoyed. That was a nice week. It was just a week.
Do you have make an effort to get copies of the recordings you play on?
Yeah, the ones that are good. I have them all.
Good.
I also have all the programs of every concert that I've ever played.
Wow.
From the 50s.
That's great.
Most
guys don't think to do that.
I did. I made a point out of that.
Uh-huh.
There are some records that I played on that I probably don't have, but most of them I do have. The ones that were meaningful. I mean, a lot of the schlock things I don't even bother with. But these days, now I'm not going into the city on a regular basis. But what I do still at this point, and right now, this is now November 2001, I still do pretty much all of Don Sebesky's stuff. I do John Pizzarelli when he uses a big band. We have a couple of things coming up next month. And I do all of Philip Glass's work. And I've been doing Philip Glass for a lot of years, as I have for Sebesky, and Pizzarelli, of course, is a little more recent. But I have those three that I hang on to. I don't go into town. I don't sub shows. I should say I don't go into town on a regular basis. And on a regular basis means you do a Broadway show or you sub a Broadway show. I don't do that anymore. But I do go in for dates and things.
Can you, on that limited basis, can you tell how has the scene changed in the last 10 years, or has it? There's a... this is not really new, but electronics replacing...
I've always gone my own way. I've always done what I thought would be helpful to me. I've tried to get as much experience as I could in all types of music, and then hopefully cash in on that experience. I've done that. Whereas most of the guys in a particular band would be of a particular type of musician doing certain types of work, I always found that I was doing other stuff, which is one of the reasons that I probably don't talk too much to A about B, or left hand about what the right hand is doing. I just kind of keep everything in its own place. I wear a lot of hats. I play church organ these days. I'm playing at a Maronite church in Danbury. I'm president of the Musicians Union, the local AFM Local 87 in Danbury. And I have the brass band, as I mentioned. But I wear a lot of different hats. I do the trombone and the tuba and keyboard and the teaching and writing. I have something I have about 8 or 9 things out with Carl Fisher, and there's something in the works right now, and there's another thing that we're talking about. So I've been doing a bit of writing for them.
You said you're still a morning person, even though you're a musician.
Oh, yeah. No, I've always been a morning person.
When you write, are you a sit at the piano and write person, or can
sometimes
you,
depends if I'm composing, I'm writing something truly original. Very often I'll sit at the piano. But if I'm arranging something, it doesn't really matter. I've gotten into Finale, using computer and Finale and all of that, and I'm just getting over the hurdle of being actually restricted by Finale, because things are so easy that you end up doubling things that you might not have doubled. You end up using sections of things that you might not have used if you were writing pen and ink. Finale is easy to take a whole section and stick it in later on, or to transpose something, or to have something for one French horn and decide to drop it down for the second and third French horn also. It's just so easy to do that sometimes I think I'm getting over the cluttering aspect.
Yeah, that's
of
interesting
that.
that you say that, how technology...
My writing prior to Finale was a little more transparent, and it's starting to get transparent again, which I kind of like.
Yeah. The machine do a little bit of the work for you.
Yeah, but I love it. I mean, not having to copy parts. That's the whole ball game. Yeah.
Who are your three favorite trombone players?
Buddy Morrow.
Oh, Buddy Morrow.
Who I love. Buddy's 82 years old. He's still out with the Tommy Dorsey band, and I like Buddy a lot. Irby Green and Brookmeyer.
Yeah.
And running very close to them are quite a few other guys, but those three, I suppose, I'd have to say would be my three favorite.
Here's a question you probably won't be able to think of, but I'll try it anyway. Can you remember one of the worst or most ridiculous recording dates that you've ever done?
Well, ridiculous, not worse.
Well, okay.
But ridiculous.
Ridiculous is good.
I was with Warren Covington on a schlock rock and roll date at a horrible studio back in the 60s. And there was a black singer, a lady, and the studio was kind of dirty. Funky. Funky is a better word. Dirty. And she was singing a song called The Ghoul in School, which went, I was lying in my bed in my school out of town, when all of a sudden I heard a horrible sound, and then you have it was the ghoul in school. I mean, as bad as it can get. It's just rotten, absolutely rotten, wretched. Now she sang this, we played it. Now it's break time. You have to know Warren Covington. Warren Covington was a wonderful trombone player, had his own band, and he was like Mr. Indiana, always with a sweater, always looked nice, always had his face washed and hands and nails manicured and the whole thing. He was just as collegiate as he could be, and about 12 years older than me, I guess. We're the only two trombones. We're sitting there. And now the singer comes off. We actually did it with her on a little stage up front, so it was a completely live date. She comes off during the break and walks past Warren, and Warren is spraying his slide. And she walks past Warren and she stops. She says, "Don't you spit at me, mother," Well, Warren got so embarrassed. I mean, he just dumbfounded. I was dumbfounded, and she stood there. She's like, "You got no right to spit at me." We're looking like, my God, So Warren immediately starts going into his school teacher routines. "Oh no, please, I would never." You see, we trombone players, and he starts going with this whole thing. We trombone players use the slide. Well, he looks to me for help, and I couldn't talk. I was on the floor. I couldn't breathe. I was laughing so hard. It was just like, you got it. Oh God, that was funny. It was just hilarious. Well, she wouldn't let up. She gave him about 5 minutes of what a rotten person he was and how dare he do this and da-da-da-da-da. And she was like sort of ghetto-ish anyhow, so she's not using the King's English, She's like really lacing into him from Funksville, And Warren was beside himself. He didn't know how to stop it. And as it went on, it just got funnier and funnier. I mean, I had trouble breathing. Anyhow, let's talk about ridiculous. That was one of the ridiculous ones.
You actually got paid to laugh that hard. Well, did you get paid? I don't know.
Jimmy Cleveland and I were on a rock and roll date where we could hardly play. We were breaking each other up with comments about the music and everything. And we finally got to the point where it was really a struggle to just play. I don't think we worked for that guy again.
Yeah. What was it? Make you're not buying it, you're selling it. So
Yeah,
it's
right.
hard to remember
I know.
that. It's a little hard to remember that in those situations.
This was beyond sell.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, that was a good story. Glad I asked. In the future, you're writing more stuff. You're
Writing a lot.
selective about your dates.
Actually, a large part of my life right now is my 10-year-old. I want to stay around long enough to give her a good shot at
Yeah.
life. So,
Yeah.
the more years I can keep going and stay
Right.
active and all of that, the better chance she has of,
Sure.
of relating and learning
Yeah.
some things that might be a little more difficult to learn otherwise. So that's
Right.
a big part of my life right now.
Great.
I spend a lot of time with her, and we have a good relationship.
Excellent.
And the future is a funny thing to say, the future, because I'm doing a lot of writing, and these trombone days that I have, and the clinics, and the Australian trip, and all of that, these are in the future. I've always been a person looking in the future. I don't look back. And I really have trouble, you're asking me certain things that have happened, and
Yeah.
I can remember them. But I don't dwell on the past. I don't think about, well, gee, things used to be, and wouldn't it be nice if they still were, and all of that.
Uh-huh.
That's absolutely ridiculous. So
Yeah.
I'm always looking to the future. Like,
Good.
what's gonna, what am I gonna have for lunch today?
Right.
What's gonna go on tomorrow? How's next week's particular thing gonna go down?
Good. It's a positive attitude.
Yeah.
Well, it's been fascinating talking to you.
It's been fascinating being here. Thanks, Mom.
Great. Appreciate it.
Okay, great.